Welcome to the recognition reception for the Women's Airforce Service Pilots exhibit. My name is Krista Overman, and I'll be your narrator for this evening. We are honored to have some special guests with us today. Please hold your applause until all are announced. Director, National Museum of the United States Air Force, Mr. David Tillotson, and his wife, Wanda. From the 88th Air Base Wing, Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, Commander, Colonel Dustin Richards and his wife, Ashley. Command Chief, Chief Master Sergeant Tessa Fontaine. Commander, National Air and Space Intelligence Center, Colonel Andy Stimmel and his wife, Laura. And Vice Chair, Board of Trustees, Air Force Museum Foundation, Ms. Trish Young. We would also like to extend a warm welcome to all family members of the WASPs that are with us tonight. Ladies and gentlemen, our first speaker of the evening, a WASP T6 build owner and WASP brand actor, Ms. Liz Poppelman.
Thank you, and good evening. In addition to my WASP T6 project and WASP reenacting, I am an ambassador of the National WASP World War II Museum in Sweetwater, Texas. The executive director, Lisa Taylor, hoped to be with us tonight, but unfortunately a family emergency called her away. When the U.S. entered World War II, it was quickly realized that the war could not be won without the contributions of every man, woman, and child. Women ended up playing a critical role which cut across every industry and branch of military service. In the words of Oveta Culp-Hobby, commander of the Women's Army Corps, today you make the change from peacetime pursuits to wartime tasks. You have given up comfortable homes, highly paid positions, and leisure. You have taken off silk and put on khaki, and all for essentially the same reason. You have a debt and a date, a debt to democracy, a date with destiny. Women were readily accepted into every area of service, except for pilot. Nancy Love and Jackie Cochran, both WASP founders, persisted through insurmountable odds to establish a female pilot unit. One of the final convincing arguments came from Cochran, who won Army General Hap Arnold over by explaining that women could do the aerial dishwashing. This was simply a metaphor linking the stateside pilot jobs to women's work in the home. This is the grunt work that no one really wants, but it's critical in every way. General Arnold reluctantly agreed to an experimental program to see if women could fly military aircraft and free more men to go to combat. Conditions for the women were less than ideal. The women flew in hand-me-down flight suits in size 44 long. For reference, I wear 38 short. They received lieutenant wages with no benefits. They paid for their room and board and existed on small stipends when they were required to overnight on the job. To make matters worse, their motives were constantly questioned. The accusations were ridiculous and never-ending. However, Mildred Axton, better known as Mickey, dispels those myths quite nicely. Mickey was a civilian pilot, happily married with a baby. Due to her flying experience, she received an invitation to train as a WASP. Her brother was serving as a pilot in Guadalcanal as a night fighter. During this time, Mickey received a letter from him informing her of the tragic loss of 18 of the 20 pilots assigned with him. The deaths all happening within the first 90 days of their assignment. He wrote, "We are desperate for help, sis. We need more pilots." Mickey was torn. She knew she could help, but how could she leave her baby? With the love and support of her family, she joined the WASP trainee program and eventually earned her wings. Undaunted by the accusations, the women stayed their course. In the words of Lieutenant Ann Sosh-Brem, U.S. Army Nurse Corps, "Our resolve is just as great as the brave men who stood among us. And with victory, our hearts were just as full and beat just as fast. And our tears fell off just as hard for those we left behind." On December 7th, 1944, the WASP graduating class the last WASP graduating class sat on Avenger Field waiting for their wings. It was a bittersweet moment because none of these women would serve. The program was disbanded. However, General Arnold spoke at their graduation and gave them a wonderful gift, the gift of validation. He declared the program to be a resounding success, stating that all doubts about their capabilities had been dispelled. You and 900 of your sisters have flown wingtip to wingtip with your brothers. The Army hasn't given you a plane you cannot fly. And that was true. In 2 years, they flew over 60 million miles, all 78 different types of aircraft, from the fastest pursuit planes to the heaviest bombers, including the infamous B-29. They performed every type of stateside job, from the dangerous to the mundane. 38 WASP lost their lives. When Lisa Taylor accepted her role as the executive director of the WASP Museum in 2019, she arrived at an exciting time when the museum was ready to double exhibit gallery space and expand exhibits. The museum purchased 2 additional aircraft to fly to air shows and launched new educational programs. When expansion was well underway, Lisa visited with several WASP families and asked if they were happy with the expansion plans. They were in complete agreement with the museum's representation of their mothers, but there was one thing they knew their mothers had always wanted: to be featured in the larger context of the war in the Air Force alongside the men they served with. Having their own museum was wonderful, but they wanted to be part of the main story instead of a footnote. Today, the National Museum of the United States Air Force has granted a deep wish for which the WASP have carried. The WASP Museum offers its deepest gratitude to this institution for featuring our pilots as a part of the larger narrative of the Air Force history. I know in their minds, the WASP are finally where they belong.
Thank you, Ms. Poppelman. We would now like to invite the curator, Research Division, National Museum of the United States Air Force, Ms. Megan Anderson.
Good evening. My name is Megan Anderson, and I served as the research curator on the Women Airforce Service Pilots, or WASP, exhibit. When I was hired 3 years ago, I knew from the start that updating this exhibit to coincide with our Women in the Air Force story was on my list of priorities. I could not have been more thrilled. After all, it was an interest in World War II history, particularly the contributions of women on the home front, like the WASP and the Rosies, that inspired my career in museums. Beginning in 1942, more than 1,000 women volunteered to serve their country with the WASP. In the male-dominated world of flying, the women overcame a number of hurdles to prove that they were capable pilots and, in turn, an asset to the war effort. Despite being the first women to fly military aircraft, they were denied military status and eventually disbanded in 1944. It would be more than 30 years before they were recognized as veterans under President Jimmy Carter, followed by another 30 years when they were honored with the Congressional Gold Medal for their service by President Obama, and 6 more years until a public law confirmed their place at Arlington National Cemetery. That's more than 70 years. It took 7 decades to provide complete benefits and entitlements as veterans to these women who volunteered their time, and in the case of 38 women, their lives, in support of their country as part of the United States Army Air Forces. I'm grateful to museum leadership who told us to exhibit the complete story and leave nothing unsaid. What that also means is no one batted an eye when we transformed the original 200 square foot exhibit, which included 7 rail panels and a small selection of artifacts, into what you see today. This is 900 square feet with 17 wall panels, 10 rail panels, a 6-minute educational video, links to an interactive digital map online, interpretation for the scene impaired, and more than a dozen artifacts on rotation. None of this could have been accomplished without my partners on the WASP content development team, collection management curator Krista Overman, and exhibit designer Mitchell Dorston. As a team, we worked to create meaningful concepts for each topic using everything we had at our disposal, from original artifacts and images to design elements. Support from museum leadership, contributions from the Air Force Museum Foundation, and the work of our incredibly skilled exhibit specialists, conservators, and restoration team helped bring our ideas to fruition. While conducting in-depth research, I came across many inspirational stories of accomplishments and heroism I wanted to share. However, one particular story stuck out to me from a letter I came across in our archives. In May 1970, Mary Lou Colbert wrote to Dora Doherty about a photo of herself as the only female in a class photo at Palm Springs Pursuit School. You can actually see this image in the Women at Work section of the exhibit. Colbert says, "The photo tickles me to death," and she later continues, "It describes without words our situation in the Ferry Command, I think. I was the only girl in this class, and although it had its terrifying moments, it was the most rewarding. When I soloed my P-47 ahead of all the boys but 3, they told me it really inspired them. I presume they meant it. A nicer bunch of boys I never knew after that solo. No more sneering nor incredulity, all very gallant and well-mannered and downright interested in my progress with the other planes." I would like to thank you, our distinguished visitors, senior leaders, friends and family of the WASP, and audience members who came here tonight to celebrate the exhibit's opening. But most importantly, I would like to thank those groundbreaking female pilots who were determined to fly and determined to be remembered. Without them, these stories could never be told. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Anderson. As our final speaker, we invite the Textile Conservator, Collection Management Division, National Museum of the United States Air Force, Ms. Sarah Gilcrease.
Good evening. My name is Sarah Gilcrease, and I'm the Textile Conservator for the museum, a job I'm sure most of you have probably never heard of. While Ms. Anderson was responsible for researching and then communicating the historical significance of the WASPs to the public, I was part of the behind-the-scenes work of preserving the physical objects these pilots left behind. Conservation is any action taken to further the long-term preservation of tangible cultural heritage, the physical things that museums collect and protect for future generations. This includes ensuring no harm comes to these objects in the first place, as well as stabilizing and in some cases disguising existing damage. As the Textile Conservator for this exhibit, my job was to do just that for the many uniforms on display here. Conservation for an exhibit begins with a careful examination of the objects chosen for display by the curator. For me, this means looking at a garment with a fine-tooth comb, down to examining every last seam allowance and turning pockets inside out. I look for both obvious damage, like moth holes or tears, but also less quantifiable or concrete issues, like areas where fabric might have been worn thin from repeated abrasions or a seam that could snap if put under stress. This examination also has the added bonus of revealing hidden details of a garment that I can relay back to the curators. Everything from a manufacturer's tag that reveals where it was made to patterns of damage that indicate how it was used and worn. From here, I determine what treatment is needed to stabilize a garment, what preventative measures are needed to protect it while on display. Treatments always begin with an extensive vacuuming of a highly specialized and very expensive vacuum to remove anything that might be on the surface of the garment. Then any necessary stitch repairs are made, from closing a failed seam allowance, painstakingly working a thread through existing holes bit by bit, to disguising moth damage, where bright white interfacing was visible after the surface fabric was eaten away. The latter involves a complex process of custom dyeing a modern fabric to match the historic garment and then inserting it into the area of loss before securing it to the surrounding fabric. Importantly, any action I take should be both well documented and reversible. Future conservators should be able to determine what stitching was done by my hand in contrast to what was original to the garment, and, if necessary, be able to remove my interventions without damaging it. It's this reversibility that separates conservation from restoration. After treatment is completed, the preventative work begins. For WASP, I custom-built 4 mannequins that you see here to display each garment and archival chemically built materials to avoid potentially damaging interactions between materials and the object it supports. Each mannequin is built out to an individual garment's dimensions, something that can be quite challenging when working with extremely tailored garments like the Santiago blue service coat you'll see here. Creating these custom mannequins not only allows us to represent how the garments would have looked on the women who wore them, it prevents future damage to the garments by removing strain on particular areas. Think about the distortion that you see in your own closet when you've left something hanging on a hanger for too long. Our exhibits division then constructed the wonderful cases you see with a variety of hidden and not so hidden features. On the front of the cases, you'll notice an opening on the lower chamber. Inside that chamber are some specific, if very unsightly additions that reduce the effects of chemical off-gassing. Think of the smell of old clothes after being kept in a drawer for too long, as well as maintain a specific humidity to permit problems like swelling of the fibers, dye bleed, and mold growth. Above the main part of the case is another chamber where the precise lighting needed to illuminate the garments, but not fade them, was installed by our lighting designer on a motion sensor. In addition to these not-so-visible features, you'll notice a brightly colored blue wool strip of fabric in each case. The various blues fade at different rates when exposed to light, acting as a canary in the coal mine for us to alert us that something has gone awry with our lighting and we need to intervene before damage occurs to the garments. Together, all these painstaking and easily missed features help ensure the physical property that we've been entrusted with will survive for future generations to appreciate and learn from. I'll leave you tonight with a challenge to think more like a conservator. As you walk through the exhibit, see if you can spot the areas where I had to intervene. Can you see the small spots of the uniform where the color doesn't quite match its surroundings, a trick to allow future conservators to visually identify my work? Can you spot the carefully disguised insect pins that hold close a collar where a button has long since been lost? And what about the ever so slight distortion of the fabric where twill tape was used to replace a belt that's long since been lost to time? If you do, ask yourself what might have caused this damage and what it means for the object. Did it occur while being worn by a pilot while serving her country? Or was it something that happened in the years after her service? And what does it mean for these women to have cherished and preserved something as mundane as a suit of clothing for decades, often passing it down to their descendants before it was eventually donated to the museum? In short, what stories can the objects themselves tell us? Thank you.
We would also like to recognize another guest here this evening, Miss Allison Fullerton, an artist from Nashville, Tennessee, who recently donated 6 portraits of the WASP to the museum. The portraits, which are on display here tonight, are part of her Fly Girls World War II WASP series, which toured nationally before finding a permanent home here at the National Museum of the United States Air Force. Each portrait combines photographs, news clippings, digital art, and encaustic wax, and are designed to draw the viewer up close to examine the details and read about how the WASP were portrayed in the 1940s. While her husband was stationed in Germany, Ms. Fullerton had the opportunity to meet with and hear the stories of female military leaders. This experience inspired her to create the Fly Girl series as a tribute to the WASP, who broke ground for today's women who serve. The museum is grateful to Ms. Fullerton for donating her work and is looking forward to putting them on display this month in our 3rd building art space. Thank you, Allison, for entrusting the museum with your work and allowing us to use this artwork to inspire the next generation. As we conclude the formal portion of this evening, we invite you to take a closer look at the newest addition to the World War II gallery, as well as the Fly Girl exhibit, and to enjoy the reception. On behalf of the National Museum of the United States Air Force, we would like to thank all of you who joined us here. Have a great evening.